Hello and welcome to our analysis of iCAT9. iCAT9 was the last proctored mock of this season. It was the third proctored mock of this season. Also, now that iCATs 25 to 10 are done, we've entered the final lap of preparation for this year's CAT. So you would have a fair handle on what kind of questions you want to attempt, what is your attempt strategy for each section, what are the kind of attempts and accuracy that you're getting, etc. We saw in iCAT 10 how it was a simpler mock compared to the actual CAT. iCAT 9 on the contrary was more or less at par with CAT 2017. So the very first thing that we observe about this mock was that it was a moderately difficult mock. The average difficulty level or LOD per question was mapped close to 1.9. To be precise, this was approximately 1.87. This number is arrived at by taking the difficulty level of each question as any value from 1 to 3, where 1 is easy and 3 is tough. So this is nothing but the arithmetic mean of difficulty of each question. Just to give you a perspective, the actual CAT is rated somewhere around 1.9 to 1.95. So it can be said to be marginally simpler compared to the actual CAT, but on the whole, we can say it is quite similar or representative to the actual exam. How was the verbal section? The verbal section again was of moderate difficulty compared to 2 or 3 of the earlier mocks, with the average difficulty being mapped close to 1.8. Again, just to give you a perspective, in the actual exam, this value is rated somewhere around 1.85 to 1.9. Keep 1.9 as your benchmark and you can say that this was again slightly simpler than the actual exam. In verbal, we need to analyze it in two parts because the test has a clear-cut pattern where we have 24 questions which are RCs and 10 questions which are non-RCs, which includes the theta or numerical entry questions and the para-summary questions. So we start with the RCs. The most common format also followed in this particular mock is where we have 3 sets of 6 questions each and 2 sets of 3 questions each. Of course, this can vary from mock to mock. Also, the sequence of sets within each mock may vary. So let's move on to these RCs and see which ones could have been attempted. So when we look at this graph, typically we say that we look at the subject matter of the RCs and then try and solve them. However, we believe that we should also have a look at its length, that's the word length given here, the number of questions and the difficulty level of each question. So combining all these factors, you get a much better perspective as to which RC should have been attempted and which could have been skipped. Of course, the difficulty level per question can often be found only after the mock has been attempted, but the remaining 3 parameters, that's the subject matter, the word length and the number of questions, is in front of you when you attempt the passage. So there's a lot of clarity on that aspect and you can use that to make your decisions. If we look at this particular mock, the average difficulty of the section, as we said, was close to 1.6. Now, if I look at this, there is a very clear trend emerging that there were 3 particular RCs which were definitely tougher than the average difficulty of the section. 2 of them were marginally difficult, whereas 1 was significantly tougher than the section average. Also, when I look at these, the toughest RC, which is 2.5. Now, when I look at 2.5, which means it's tending towards 3. So it's anyways between moderate and tough. Also, if I look at the topic is good. Recycling, easy to read. But look at its length compared to the other passages. Typically in CAT, you will find that your RCs are somewhere between 400 to 600 words. Whereas this is straight away double at 1200 words. So this is actually longer than all 4 of these RCs. or possibly as long as all four of them combined. So if I look at these two aspects, the length and the difficulty level, this is definitely a passage that I should have skipped in the exam. Luckily for me, this was the last passage of the section. So anyways, I would have encountered the easier and shorter passages earlier. Now, among these remaining four, observe another clear trend. The two more difficult RCs, or the two RCs of moderate difficulty, are also the ones with the least questions. Just 3 questions each. So when I consider these, the incentive for me to solve these RCs is really low. So obviously now I am directed more towards solving the other two passages. Let's have a look at these two passages here. The difficulty level here is reasonably low, just above easy. Secondly, they are both among the shortest passages in the entire section. Of course, these two have the same length, exactly the same length, so that's okay. But these are still easier. Also, both these RCs have 6 questions each. So now when I look at these parameters, there are 2-3 things going in favor of these passages. One, the length. One, the number of questions. 2, the length. 3, the difficulty level. Of course, this comes post facto. But now when I look at these two, this is again something related to governance and social conditions. Human rights is again something related to social conditions. So both these passages have a strong social impact or social flavor to them. Again, when I look at this third passage here, cow vigilantism, it's a current affairs topic with a strong social flavor. So these 3 in between passages have a very strong social flavor. So here the risk for you is that if you do not like such topics which have a socio-economic or socio-political flavor, then you might be in big trouble as far as this mock or section is concerned. However, keep in mind that a lot of CAT RCs now tend to have topics which have socio-economics, socio-politics as part of the package. So you need to be well versed, or you need to try and read as many different topics on different passages on these kind of topics as possible. Here, out of these two passages, which were 3 question passages, somebody interested in astronomy or science might have preferred cosmic background over cow vigilantism. But if I were to really prioritize my RCs, I would say human rights and labor reforms would definitely be my picks. Among these other two, I might have picked up any one and or I might have even picked up both and tried to do 1 or 2 questions. But if I take up these 18 questions, even if I try and solve all 4 of these, considering that they are all really short, I might not have solved all the questions within all these RCs, but of these 4 passages, it was eminently possible to try and attempt somewhere around 14 questions. So this was, or anywhere between say 14 to 15 questions would really be possible as far as these RCs were concerned. Let me take this as 15. So let's say you take this passage on labor reforms, you can attempt 4 out of 6. Whereas on cosmic background, if you are comfortable, you can attempt all 3. So it does not really matter whether you attempt all questions in one and half in other, or attempt a few questions everywhere. But on the whole, I would say that all 4 of them were eminently doable, and you should have tried and maximized your attempts here. 14 to 15 attempts in the RCs would be reasonably good. Let's move on to the non-RC and numerical entry type questions. So the standard question types were covered here. That's jumbled sentences, contextual odd man questions, and para summary questions. Typically, as we say, contextual odd man questions are a variation of jumbled sentences, whereby you need to form a passage of say 4 or 5 statements and then identify the one statement that does not fit in. So most commonly these are slightly tougher than the jumbled sentences, but here we observe that the jumbled sentences were moderate while these were easy. On the other hand, the 3 MCQs on para summary were all tough. So here when I look at these 10 questions, even though we tell people to attempt all the non-MCQs here, the number of good attempts really would not be more than 5. When we say good attempts, we mean those attempts where you are fairly confident about your answer. So if I then go and arrive at ideal attempts for this particular mock, I would say in the RCs, you would need to arrive somewhere at 15 attempts or 14 to 15 attempts. In the numerical entry questions or the non-RCs, anywhere between 4 to 5 questions. So on the whole, if you were to ask us, 19 attempts or 19 questions would be a good attempt for this particular section. Now before we go and look at one particular RC, let's have a look at the next graph within this analysis. So this graph is something you will see for all 3 sections. What we've done is we've mapped the difficulty level of each question on this graph. That often tells you that even if an RC is moderate, how you could have attempted 1 or 2 questions also within that RC and tried to increase your attempts. So in this graph, you can notice that the blue bars indicate all the RCs and MCQ questions, while the pink or orange bars indicate the numerical entry questions. So as you can see here, this very long passage on recycling only had tough or moderate questions. There was no simple question in this. So when I combine this with the length and the difficulty, this was definitely a passage that should not have been looked at. Whereas when I look at the passage on human rights, observe that the first half or nearly the entire passage comprised simple questions with one moderate question right at the end. So when I look at this trend here, this is something that I would definitely try or I should have tried. On the other hand, when I look at this passage on cow vigilantism, moderate questions everywhere, so average LOD 2. Observe this difference. Cosmic background, again average LOD 2, but marked difference with one easy, one moderate, one tough question. So a student might actually have a lot of ease in attempting all questions here compared to all questions here. On the contrary, the passage on labor reforms, a lot of easy to moderate questions. So that is where I would have again tried this question completely. When we come to the numerical entry questions, this part was fairly simple. Then there was one other simple question here. The para summaries were tough. Again, the para summary was tough here, but there was another simple question here. So when I look at these 5 simple questions and a couple of other moderate questions here, anywhere between 4 to 5 attempts and searching for these would have been very, very critical. Of course, this takes into account the assumption that you have practiced all 3 of these question types adequately and are fairly competent in each of them. Let's have a look at one RC, let's say the one on labor reforms, and try and solve 1 or 2 questions in that. So here this is the passage on labor reforms, reasonably short, 3 paragraphs. It starts off with the history of the labor movement in India, then brings in the current scenario where it says that despite several decades of economic progress, labor laws enshrined in the constitution have not only largely been amended or nor reformed, so making them archaic, means obsolete to contemporary business. Then the next passage focuses on productivity of labor, and then the last one focuses on the politics of the labor reforms. Let's look at the questions now. You can observe that in any RC, the questions can either be purely factual, the questions can be purely inferential, which means that you need to look at the data and then arrive at your own conclusions, deductions, or identify the assumption, identify the implications of the statement, etc. Or they can be a mix of the two. Here, let's try and see which questions are inferential and which are factual. Which of the following is true according to the passage? So there will be 3 statements which are false and 1 that is true. So we need to look at each of them and eliminate them based on the passage. This can be called a semi-inferential question because you need to look at each option. It might not be directly given in the passage. So read the passage and then arrive at some idea of what that statement is saying, eliminate it accordingly. A suitable title for the passage would be So this is a purely inferential question where you read the whole passage, make a gist of this and arrive at a suitable title. The low labor productivity in India can be attributed to all of these. So this is a purely factual question. You just read the passage, you will get your answer. Offshore firms from developed countries prefer to set up manufacturing facilities in the following countries except. So again, this thing would be mentioned in the passage. You cannot assume data. So just go to the passage, search for the relevant points, you will get your answer. The fundamental labor rights discussed in the passage were created to safeguard the rights of the following. Except. So again, here these would be created. Here you need to understand the word except means to safeguard the rights of three categories only. So there will be three categories here who are mentioned in or which are mentioned in the passage. One will not be mentioned in the passage. Which of the following can be concluded? So conclusion means something that can be read from the passage and then you arrive at it as a final statement. So it is a purely inferential question. So now when you see something like this, once you've made this small summary in your mind, you can start off by looking at the factual questions and read the passage again. So for instance, if I look at question 10, the keywords here are offshore firms from developed countries prefer to set up manufacturing facilities except. So they'll set up in three and not set up in one. Let's go and check this part of the data first. So we search for these country names and we find that there is a lot of data here. So it says perhaps this mood was reflected when during the early days of offshoring, firms from the developed world, so this was asked in the question, showed greater interest in setting up manufacturing facilities. Again, this is required in my question. In Thailand, Mexico, China, Vietnam, Philippines. So let's look at my options. Sorry, let me just scroll down a little. Yeah. So Mexico, yes, the offshore firms from the developed world were interested in setting up manufacturing facilities, yes. Philippines, yes. China, yes. Rather than in India. So in the earlier days, they were not interested in setting up facilities in India. So offshore firms from developed countries prefer to set up manufacturing facilities in the following countries except in India. This becomes my answer. The low labor productivity in India can be attributed to what? So here when you go, you will have to read the whole passage and then arrive at a gist and mark your answer. If I see this passage, I said that the second paragraph focuses on productivity. So then I would go back and forget the history part and start from here. Despite several decades of economic progress, labor laws enshrined in the Constitution have not largely been amended nor reformed, making them archaic to contemporary business and ways of working. While laws are one thing, productivity is also another cause of concern. Studies conducted have shown that India is affected by low productivity. Now, what are the reasons? Apparently, political ideologies and mindsets are also to be blamed. Studies have indicated that regional mindset has impaired domestic industry and economic growth. Moreover, a political climate dominated by the socialist ideology during the 70s and 80s contributed to a mindset which perceived profit-making and enterprise as a taboo, thereby also laying extra emphasis on worker-centric labor policies. So now when we go to the options, does it say poverty and illiteracy? No, it really puts the onus on political ideologies and mindsets. So this is definitely gone. This is definitely gone. Yes, it mentions lax labor laws, definitely, but there is a lot of focus put on political ideologies and mindsets for low productivity. So that is where I believe that political inference would be the correct answer, and whereas lacks labor laws really, okay, sorry, we also know that there is an extra emphasis on worker-centric labor policies. So when I now consider both of them, these two seem very close to each other, and as a student, I would actually now change this and put this as the correct answer. So this is the kind of thought process that I would have in the exam. Similarly, you can go to each question and try and solve them independently, use elimination and get your answer. On the whole, if we were to summarize this mock, we can say that this section actually is a moderate section in a moderate mock. It was possible to attempt anywhere between 3.5 to 4 passages with partial attempts, so close to 14 to 15 attempts in RCs, and 4 to 5 strategic attempts in the non-RCs were possible, thereby allowing anywhere close to 18 to 19 attempts for this section in order to clear the cutoff. In the second and third part of this analysis, we'll look at the DILR and quant sections respectively. All our previous analyses are available on our official YouTube channel given in the link here. You can subscribe to this channel by clicking this link. By hitting the bell button, you also get notifications every time a new video is put up. Feel free to put in your comments, feedback or questions on the thread below the video. Keep watching, wish you all the very best, and thank you.